obviously, when you're talking about visions for the future, and particularly with a general election coming up, what we can expect to see from the smaller parties, we certainly know what we can expect from the bigger ones, is very, very important. So I'm delighted that we have with us today William Clouston, who has been leader of the SDP since 2018, and also Ben Habib, who is an advisor to the Reform Party, but of course was also a Brexit Party MEP elected in 2019. As you can see, we have, I'm afraid, one absentee. Laurence Fox is terribly ill after having picked up some kind of bug in Morocco. We won't go into that. But so he's no longer, he can't be with us. But anyway, he sends his very best wishes. So I'm just going to have a brief discussion with the gentleman here. But most of this session will actually be for your questions, because it's all about what is on offer. What is the future going to be like over the next couple of years politically? Okay, thank you. I'll start. I've introduced us there. I wanted to start by asking, because we have in our title to this conference, we have our vision for Britain in the future. So if I could start, William, with you, in 3 minutes flat, could you tell us, what is your vision for Britain as the SDP leader?
So what would an SDP Britain look like? I mean, some of you in the room probably know a little bit about us, but the SDP is a party of the patriotic conservative left. So there's a little bit of left-wing economics in there, which we think are the basics. Well, let's start. Secure borders, for a start, which is a massive issue now. We would have a secure border, quote, "We will decide who comes into this country and under what circumstances." That's John Howard from Australia. And they succeeded because they wanted to. And I always argue on this issue that if we had a government that really wanted to get a secure border, it could. It could look at the SDP policy and implement that, and that would do it. Another thing that we do is build some houses. There is a housing crisis. We're in Birmingham. Anything south of Birmingham, it's an acute housing crisis. And it's caused, in my view, by the combination of two things, really. Mass immigration, but probably more importantly, the deliberate destruction of state sector capacity in house building. And you can't do that without it having some sort of effect. So I'd get the state back in the business of building housing at scale. Everyone says you'll end up with monstrosities, and they pick up the architectural review from the 50s and think we're going to get brutalist architecture. You don't have to do that, so I reject that. A third very important thing is family, which is in our strapline, family industry nation or family community nation. You've got to defend the family in public policy. You've got to have policies which actually do something to help people get married and to stay together. And you've got to defend the family and family life and marriage in cultural discourse, which I think probably many of you do, and we do. But we're on our own, really, in politics in doing that. The final thing I want to mention is industry, because industry is the foundation, actually, of your local economies everywhere. This city, I lived here for 4 years. The crude summary of what's happened to our industrial base is it's been gutted because of indifference to what is made where and by whom, even if it's made by slaves. And as soon as you lose your industry, the moment the factories close, the drug dealers move in. So you've got to think, you've got to have a trade policy, you've got to have an industry policy that works, and you've got to be serious about reindustrializing because we've let it go. And finally, you've got to be serious in general. You'll hear a lot from the major parties. Most of the time, most of the output they do is comms-based. It's very superficial type of politics. Most of it's cowardly. Anyone that listened to any questions, and maybe you don't, and I don't generally, but Matt was on last night, and there's about a 2 or 3 minute clip that Matt Goodwin had on last night about the migration crisis, and you won't hear that. You just don't hear that from our establishment parties, and you heard it from him, and it was serious. Thank the Lord, someone in that room was prepared to be serious.
Thank you very much. Beautifully summed up. Ben, what would you say would be offered by the Reform Party?
So the Reform Party has its roots, obviously, as you might know, in the Brexit Party. Yeah. In fact, Reform is a new name for the Brexit Party. And I think I would start by defining why the Brexit Party existed and why I was a member of the Brexit Party and what Brexit means. Brexit, for me, means the United Kingdom reclaiming, and it's a shame Laurence isn't here because the name Reclaim, are there any Reclaim members in the audience? Hands up if you're a Reclaim member or supporter. Okay, we got one. But it's a great name. Reclaim is a fantastic name because Brexit, in significant part, without being, backward looking and, seeking out those sunny uplands which disappeared. We're always accused of seeking out sunny uplands that disappeared years ago. Reclaim's a great name because it's the reclamation of pride in our country. It's the reclamation of British values, which actually inherently are very good, accommodating, generous and kind. It's being proud of our heritage. It's reclaiming the right to be proud of being an independent, sovereign, United Kingdom. And these are the values that are at the heart of Brexit. And while I'm on that, I think one of the key aspects of reform will be the defeat of woke. And I want to define woke because people bandy the word around quite a lot, but I think it is helpful at least to define it as, in the way that I see it. Woke for me is the ostensible, and I use the word ostensible on purpose, ostensible championing of minority interests, largely at the exclusion of and often to the detriment of the majority. And so it's a way of politicizing minority groups in order to dumb down what is in the interest of the majority. And we see that with trans rights, we see that with LGBT agenda being put up and ahead and to the detriment of the nation. And we see that, for example, in the illegal migration that you referred to, William, across the Channel, almost defeating the obvious need for the majority for the benefit of the majority to defend our borders. So it's the reclamation of British values, it's the reclamation of belief in our heritage, our history, it's the defeat of woke. It is saving the union. We've done something, and I think it's partly down to our politics being entirely hijacked by woke. We have done something which no sovereign nation in history, whether democratic, dictatorial, whatever, has ever done, which is to partition the United Kingdom and somehow pass that off as a technocratic, bureaucratic response to the need for Brexit. There is no reason for Northern Ireland to have been yanked out of the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, out of the United Kingdom. In order for us to Brexit. So at the heart of reform will be the defeat of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and the Windsor Framework, by the way, is just another name, another form of the protocol. It is not a solution to it. And then economically, my vision for the United Kingdom is much less state control. We've become, Tony Blair introduced the nanny state, but Boris Johnson with lockdowns and, spending money like there was no tomorrow, printing it in order to spend it, locking us up at home, that took the nanny state into sort of wet nurse territory. And we've got to roll back the state. We've got to make people responsible for themselves. We've got to have less borrowing, less taxation. People have got to be empowered to choose how they spend their money. Businesses have got to be induced into investing, not by taxing them to the hilt, but by taking away constraints on them. And then finally, we need much less regulation in society. This idea that we can't roll back 4,000 EU laws because it would create a vacuum is utter garbage. We could throw those 4,000 laws out with zero adverse impact, and we could do it overnight. They won't do it because they want to remain hitched at the hip. They won't do it because they want to remain hitched at the hip to the EU. So, just in summary, because I've been all around the shop, It's the reclamation of British values. It's a belief in ourselves. It's self-confidence in our history. It is stopping the boats. It's putting down borders, bringing the United Kingdom together, charting an independent, low-tax, deregulated economic policy which will enrich the United Kingdom and is designed unashamedly for the United Kingdom. That's my vision of the United Kingdom.
Before we go to the audience, just a couple of questions. We had a speech this morning from Rafe Feidelmanku about migration, and this is there's no question about it, the issue which is top of most people's agendas. Can you just sum up what your party's policy would be on immigration, William?
Well, immigration has got out of control. I mean, there are a lot of broader issues that we can discuss, but it's largely an experiment. I sometimes tease people and say, what do you think of the UK government's approach, their policy on integration and assimilation? And of course, there isn't one. No, it has been. I mean, it's pretty much a free-for-all, and it's out of control. But we are addicted to it, and actually the poor old public get smashed from both sides. You have your sort of cultural open border liberals, Liberal Party, Lib Dems and Labour, who want it for cultural reasons. They don't really like the country very much. A lot of them despise it. So that's at that end. And then you've got the econ liberals who see the country as a shop. They can't tell the difference between a country and a shop. Everything's for sale, very unpatriotic. And they regard people as econs and just drop them in. So, we're addicted to this. And that's why we've ended up with a million. There's two things we're addicted to that we've got to get over: debt and immigration. But the policy is to have a long-range, generational mass immigration pause. I don't think you
A
mass immigration pause. Now, I don't think you can be boneheaded about and say all immigration stops tomorrow, otherwise my daughter-in-law might not be able to come here. But basically, you've got to get mass immigration back under control. I take as a first stage of that 50,000 net. I know people don't like net, but you're at 500,000 net now. So, but the key is it's a very successful policy, as Rafe said, from the 20s to the 70s, actually started the 70s really. The United States had a mass immigration pause and the country thrived. You've got to start looking at what you can do. There's two major effects of mass immigration that are bad down on our society. It's depressed wages and it's disincentivized training, to train your own people. Why bother training your own people if you can just ship people in? That's the model of the NHS, and it's been the model of our economics, and it's got to stop.
Ben, broadly, what would the policy be?
Yeah, so broadly, I mean, it's not a million miles away from what William described. There are different forms of immigration. Obviously, illegal immigration reforms policy is nil, and we would actually stop the boats. We wouldn't be using deportation as our policy to deter crossings of the Channel. We would actually stop the boats in the Channel and either take them straight back to French shores or turn them round. I think there's got to be zero tolerance to illegal migration. Then as far as legal migration is concerned, I think you've got to be very careful in the way that you conduct that. I mean, there are a number of different issues. The first is, if you, as we are, hooked on cheap, unskilled labor from abroad, what you end up with is low productivity, a lack of incentive by big corporations to automate, a lack of incentive to upskill indigenous British workers. And that's how we have practiced immigration over the last 20 odd years. And that's got to stop. We've got to have a much more skill-based approach to immigration. And really, you want as little immigration as possible. You want your nation to be functioning within itself as an organism. British interests, as I said at the beginning, British interests being put forward, first and foremost. At the end of the day, if you have unbridled immigration the way we have, it's really a Ponzi scheme, because you take people in, it gives you the illusion of the economy growing, but you create a long tail of liabilities in looking after these people as they age. And as I say, you also run up against all the productivity issues that we've suffered with so much. So we would have a much tighter control on legal immigration. We would have a much more skills-based approach to legal immigration. we would try and reduce completely unskilled immigration, and we would stop illegal immigration.
Thank you. Before we engage with the audience about this, just one, it's quite a factual question, actually. When it comes to standing in 2024, the general election, I asked Laurence, because he couldn't be here, Reclaim are going to field candidates in certain seats where there are particular issues such as Batley and Spen, where there's a free speech issue, things like that. But I think it's going to be quite specific and limited. Could you tell us what your plan is in terms of the actual election, William?
Well, we have an aim of having about 120 candidates if we can manage it, which is a good target for us. I think one of the things, if you're in my party, I will tell you the truth. And, if I said, well, prepare for government, you'd say, well, nurse, come and take this person away, So it's gradual, improvement. We had 20 last time. Obviously, in the 80s, there were hundreds of candidates, but 20 last time. 120 would be good. I'd like 75 in England, because then you get a party election broadcast. And obviously, there are places we stood last time that we're going to concentrate on. The places that we will do very well, where we're quite strong, places like South Leeds and others. So we also have a pact with the Reform Party. It's a small pact, it's a limited pact, it's a no-stand agreement in 6 seats each nationally. So we don't stand in their top 6, and they don't stand in ours. And we have a specifically geographical pact in South Yorkshire, where we're fighting all the 14 South Yorkshire seats in a joint platform with Reform. We have 7, they have 7. We're a smaller party. I think on the carve-up they had the slightly more winnable 7 than we did. But I'm happy to do that. It's very difficult. There are probably be questions about this. People say, why aren't you working with? It's actually quite difficult to get a detailed pact together with another party. You have to tell people in your own membership, sorry, you can't stand in that location. It's quite difficult. But anyway, I'm optimistic. I think we'll do very well.
And Ben, what about Reform? How many people would you say?
So before I answer that question, I'll just say I was very, very reluctant to join any political party. And the only reason I joined Reform, well, there are 2 reasons I joined Reform, other than the pressure that Richard incessantly put on me. There were 2 reasons. One of them was to have an electoral body through which Anne Widdecombe and I and others who believe so much in the union had a mechanism to give effect to that agenda. That was the first reason. And you can only do it, I think, ultimately through a political party at the ballot box. And then the other reason, and I was chastised when I was sort of revealed as a member of Reform a few weeks ago when I said this. But the other reason is to obliterate the Tory party. That is the only real reason I've joined Reform. And the thinking behind that, it's not a vindictive desire just to do damage to the Tories. It's because they have been in power for 13 years and they have utterly failed. The economy is in a huge mess. Socially, we're in a huge mess. Taxation is at a 70-year high. State debt is at a 70-year high. Unemployment actually is fudged. We've got 5.9 million people on the universal credit system. So they need to be taken to the cleaners. And unless they're taken to the cleaners, and they will not realize that failure will result in being ejected. Failure must never be rewarded with incumbency. And no matter how much a Tory politician, and the pressure will rise as we get near the general election, sits there and says, I know we're bad, but the other lot are even worse. No matter how much that mantra is put about, just ignore it. Do not vote for a Tory candidate at the next election. They must be put out into the wilderness. They will not learn until they're put out in the wilderness.
I think that's a very important point actually you make there, Ben, because that argument of, well, look, God, you're going to get Labour if you don't vote for us. That's no longer playing, actually. I think people really won't go along with that at all. Anyway, thank you for those answers. How many people are you standing?
Well, I wasn't aware of this pact that Richard's obviously got with William. But
it's on your website.
Maybe on the website. Richard says 630. And I think it's really important that we particularly tackle every marginal Labour and every marginal Tory seat. We may end up with no MPs, but we will do a lot of damage.
Great. Wow, I knew there'd be questions. Can we take a gentleman there, actually, in the centre? in black, yes. Can you make sure you all stand up when you speak, and it makes it easier to hear.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, William. I have a statement and a question. And my statement is, I think this country is suffering from a plague of fake growth caused by three things, and thank you for speaking about some of them today. Mass immigration, mass migration, fiscal deficits, and money supply, all of which have gone through the roof and massage the GDP numbers to look fantastic, but don't make any of us feel any richer or any better off. My question is, to solve the migration issue, don't we need to reframe growth as GDP per capita? This will take away the incentive from governments to continue with this policy of mass migration. It will in fact incentivize a reduction in migration, and we can all watch earnings soar. What's your view?
That's a very specific question. I'll have to come to you first, Ben.
Well, I completely agree. I think GDP per capita and GDP per hour worked, in other words, productivity, those are the two key things that we should be looking at, not GDP. And the only issue I take with you is actually they've massaged the figures, but the figures, even after the massaging, don't look great. You know, we've had close to nil GDP growth in sterling terms since the Conservatives took office, close to nil over that 13-year period. And actually in dollar terms, we've shrunk as an economy, and we've shrunk considerably in dollar terms per head, as you said, per capita. And the US, by comparison, has grown by somewhere between 30 and 50%. I'm pulling figures out of my mind. You can fact check me later. But the US, even though it has some of the same problems we do socially and immigration-wise, is a powerhouse of an economy compared to the UK. We have been utterly mismanaged. And the two key things we should look at is productivity and GDP per capita. You're absolutely right.
William.
Yeah, very good statement and a very good sentiment question. The first line of economics green paper we published 2 years ago, The End of Indifference, is debt-fueled consumption is not prosperity. But literally, that is what we've been offered, that's what we've got. And all three sectors, households, corporates, and government sector, are chock-a-block with debt, cheap money, and it's as if it didn't matter. Partly, I'm going to have a little, there's probably a line here between me and Ben. Partly the reason is that we've ingested a sort of liberal economics, which masquerades as liberal. It's actually just indifferent. You don't care about certain things. One of the things you should care about is your trade deficit. This country is a classic example. Actually, the United States isn't very good either. You run trade deficits persistently for 20, 30 years, you will, at the end of that period, you will own less and you will owe more. It literally destroys prosperity. And it's the people that govern us don't care because it's okay. In fact, if we've got an 80 billion trade deficit, actually, no, it's not a problem. It's like a crack addict saying, my dealer really believes in me. All these people are investing in me. The thing that on the mathematics of international trade that matches it up, which is foreign direct investment, must be there because you've got to sell assets to counteract your trade deficit. You can only pay for imports in three ways: exports, selling something you made yesterday, either assets or issuing debt. And until we get a political class that is going to face up to this, we have no prospect of becoming richer per capita.
The gentleman right at the back with the white hair, actually. Well, thank you. He's got his arm up there, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Ben was talking earlier about getting rid of regulation that fell over from the EU. And I don't know whether a lot of people realise this, but the infamous straight banana rule is real, it's a real thing. But it's a marketing standard, it's got nothing to do with selling bananas at Tesco's. And the point of it is to avoid non-tariff barriers. And as WTO members, we are compelled to have that rule. Compelled. It's got nothing to do with the EU, it's just a rebadged rule from an organisation called UNIS. And all these regulations that carried over, or quite a lot of them, are there because we have to have them if you want to trade with anyone else. There's a purpose behind them. And I think people need to understand that. So it's
what's
not
the
a case
question,
of just
sir?
scribbling, putting a line through them and getting rid of them. It's not that simple. We'd have to have a lot of them anyway.
Okay, it's not that simple.
Well, I'm absolutely, I'm not advocating that we just throw away all regulation. What I am advocating is that we roll back regulation. And I think one of the most invidious forms of regulation that we've got is the drive, the political drive to net zero, which by the government's own estimate, and they always under-egg these things, is going to cost the country £1.4 trillion between now and 2050. That's £50 billion a year every year. That is massive. That's basically as much corporation tax as we take in every year being spent on taking us to net zero, even though we've got a plentiful supply of gas and we could do it much more efficiently through nuclear. So agree that in order to trade on the international stage, there are standards we've got to keep. But by the way, the United Kingdom is a standard setter, not a standards taker. The EU in many ways has poorer standards than we do, particularly on livestock, agricultural goods, and the way they fish. The way they fish is abominable. I'm not going to go on at length. But there's a great deal of deregulation we should and must do if we want to boost our economy.
William, how do you...
If I've understood you correctly, I take your point. It never made any sense to me as someone that made the Brexit arguments on the left-wing side, the Lexit side. Why would anyone want to rid themselves of EU control only to remain under the control of the WTO and setting our trade rules and so on? So I never really bought, I still don't buy, that you want trade deals all over the place. I think you want a little bit more protectionism. It sounds like almost heresy to say that, but I've said this for a long time, and because I believe it. And I don't say it because of a doctrinaire position. I say it because I think we need it. This economy now is 9% manufacturing. We're like a developing country. And you look at economic history, no country ever industrializes successfully without some sort of protection. And you either have it in ad valorem tariffs of some kind, or you have it in non-tariff barriers. What I'm arguing against is a sort of liberal indifference to the way things are. I got up in Northumberland early 6 today. I got a train from Newcastle. The train was made in Belgium. It was run by the German state. We're run by people that don't care, and it's got to stop.
The lady right at the back there.
Hi. I'd just like to...
Can you speak up, please, sir? Yeah.
I've voted Conservative all my life, and in the last 5 years, I've kind of come to the conclusion that I don't know whether I could vote again. And I'm asking Ben and William, is it, for me, after kind of looking into a few things, I kind of feel that we're governed from an international level, not nationally. So I really struggle with kind of thinking I'm even going to bother going down to vote again. So can you kind of try and convince me otherwise?
Did you?
Yeah. I mean, I think you've got to remember. I'm in the middle of local government elections, so I've seen a lot of the public, and a lot of us are very tired. But and actually, things like NCF are fantastic, and think tanks and journalists and thinkers like Matt Goodwin are fantastic. But you've got to have a political entity. In the end, you've got to have a vehicle that you can actually get on and contest seats and get power. Political power matters, and I think you've just got to keep on going. I can understand people being demoralised, but if we win in Leeds on May the 4th, people won't be demoralised. They'll be very excited and very happy. But it doesn't happen overnight. You've really got to stick in there.
Can I just actually ask, before we go to another question, one of the most asked questions I've found is, why don't you guys all get together?
Yeah.
Why
well,
don't you?
Let Ben go for that one.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Yeah. Why do we not get together?
It's the question.
I mean, I think one of the defining characteristics of people on our side of the debate is that they're all free thinkers, and they all think they've got the answer. And I do wish we could collaborate, and I wish we could put egos aside and.
Well, we are. We are collaborating.
We're in 7 seats or whatever.
14 plus 12.
Because the reason I say is that there are a number of other parties. You're the most important, so we're having you on, of course. But there are others. smaller parties, there's even the one I used to belong to, still struggling on. There's a huge number. I mean, why can't you all kind of get together?
Well, I mean, you can finish off.
I'm more or less finished. I mean, I think, it's very hard to get people to come to a political vision that they're all happy with, across the board. I didn't even want to join a political party. I'm really in it for some very specific aims, as I mentioned. And I think it would be great if Laurence, for example, joined Reform, but he'd probably say it would be wonderful if Ben joined Reclaim.
Yes. So there you go.
Well, I get asked this. We get asked this a lot, particularly on social media. And to be fair, we have met and we have tried, and it's not easy to get an electoral pact with a different party, as I say. But the main reason why I don't think the SDP is interested in merging with anymore, we won't do so, is that our actual position in the political landscape is different. We're not a right-wing party. We're a party of the Conservative left, and it's actually quite different. So while we agree with Ben on secure borders and lowering immigration, and we believe that Britain's good enough to govern itself, which it is, and we also agree on constitutional electoral reform. Those are all ticks, but those are four things. If you go to the SCB's website, you'll see probably 30 policy topic areas, and most of them are to do with economics somehow, whether it's nationalising utilities or railways, transport or education or the health service or whatever. Most of it economics comes into, and we simply wouldn't get agreement on a lot of that stuff with people on the right. And it's perfectly legitimate to have those views, but they're not our views. I always flip it, and I don't want to upset anyone in the room, but I probably won't. But I always ask, if I was on the right economically and I was on the cultural, traditional, culturally, why don't you just join Reform? Because it's the biggest entity in the thing. I don't know why. I mean, why doesn't everyone just join Reform?
Well, yeah, absolutely, join Reform.
My goodness, that's a revolutionary approach to politics there. The gentleman with the wonderful black beard there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a bit of an identity crisis that I've been struggling with over the past few years. I moved to this country in 2015 with no plans to remain. I was brought here by my employer at the time, which was a US multinational on a temporary project, which went very well, was extended by another 6 months. And at the end of that time, I decided that actually I do want to stay in this country. Since then, obviously I live in London. I am a gay man. For people who don't know what that means, that's a same-sex attracted adult human male. And because I live in London and because I use gay dating apps in London, the characters that I have to interact with from time to time are something else, I can tell you. And I've made some friends in London, and my views, the fact that I am exploratory, I don't have any sort of historical allegiance to any party in this country, to Labour or to Conservative. When I moved into this country, I consider myself left-wing. I voted Labour initially. My choices have slowly evolved. But I have a problem with people who believe that because of my identity as an immigrant and as a gay man, that I should hold certain political views. One of the issues is on the issue of culture. So first of all, I decided to remain in this country because this was the first place in the world where I felt safe to hold hands with another man on the street. That for me was a very emotional moment, and the guy I was dating at the time couldn't understand why I started crying. And I said,
Your question, sir, yeah.
So first of all, I very much respect the culture of this country, and I think it's worth defending. However, when I told a friend of mine in London the other day, I'm going to this NCF thing, he's like, what's that? Well, it's a think tank that supports British history and values. He said, oh, that sounds a bit far right. I tried to have a conversation with them. So there's two things that have been put to me in time. These people that I'm sort of trying to interact with, like LGB Alliance, like NCF, I'm told that if I do not support trans rights, then the fight against trans rights is only the tip of the wedge. And further down the line, these people who don't support trans rights are going to lead to a gay genocide, to the repeal of gay marriage, to the repeal of adoption, and so on. Second, the people on the right, politically, if I support them instead of Labour, for instance, then I need to be under no mistake, they will want to deport me one day. So those are my problems. So my question is, what do your parties offer to people like me?
Well, that's very clear, isn't it? What do you want to go first?
Well, I think your sexual orientation, where you came from, how you view yourself, is frankly irrelevant from a political perspective. The problem for me is, and I just go back to woke momentarily, the problem with woke is this championing of minority interests, ostensibly championing minority interests to the detriment of the majority, is that it's divisive. It's basically racist, it's basically sexist, it's basically homophobic, really. And what we should aim to be is a society where you're blind to ethnicity, blind to religious beliefs, blind to people's sexual orientation, and you take people for what they are and what they contribute to society. I'm half Pakistani and half English. I view myself completely British. And, I get a lot of stuff on Twitter saying, you're a Pakistani, why don't you go home? But actually, my mother's blonde, blue-eyed, born in Hounslow, and her father fought in the Somme. I couldn't be more British on that side, and I frankly couldn't be more Pakistani on my father's side. But I feel completely at home here because of British cultural values, which, by the way, go back hundreds of years. That welcoming, outwardly looking, engaging country that we are is nothing new. That comes back from our imperial past. And I know that because I grew up in post-imperial Pakistan, and I know the legacy that it left. It's a good legacy. So I would say you're all, anyone who's got a positive contribution to make is welcome when we're blind to all those things that I said we're blind to.
William,
Just first on the pressure that people feel, particularly in the big cities, when they mention anything culturally traditional or whatever. There is pressure. You'd be blind if you didn't see that. But you've got to remember one thing, that what Matt Goodwin is talking about, this new elite, they have power, but they don't have hegemony. They are not the majority. So always remember that. There are pockets, certainly cities are much more progressive than the hinterland. The second point I'd make is that it's incredibly important to make your arguments in good faith. I think people, particularly when you're talking about things like immigration. Now, as it happens, I'm married to an immigrant and a non-British national, and last count there were about 4 different races in my family. But I want an immigration pause because I think that's the best chance we have of finding the us in Britain. The argument is made absolutely in good faith, and I think if you make your argument sincerely in that way, people will accept it. And finally, again, linked to what you're talking about, Rod Liddle and I get around to the universities quite a lot. Sometimes I get banned, or some people pick it when I speak at universities. I don't know why, but actually, we found an upswelling of young people at universities, very attracted to the SDP. Why? Because it's actually quite hard to hit us. And I deliberately make it so. So a lot of young students who are conservatives, Rod and I can't speak at the invitation of a conservative group, often in the Conservative Party, without half of them joining us. And one of the reasons is, and it shouldn't be like this, but it's hard to be a conservative on campus. But it isn't very hard to be a Social Democrat. It's much easier.
we have a couple more questions, actually. Gentleman there in the blue jacket. Whoever's get to him first. Here we go, William. There we go.
My question is for Ben, and Ben, I don't doubt your sincerity or ability, and I thought the answer you gave to that last question was excellent. But I have a question about the model for reform, because it's a company, which means that it's controlled by its directors and shareholders, which means I think there's only one or two people who really control it. That's essentially your leader. And that's completely new for a British political party. And it means you cannot, or not completely, Not completely. I think
Brexit Party
there was
was
the
also
Brexit
a
Party,
company.
but that was the forerunner. What it means is that you are disenfranchising people. You are not involving people as members. I know you call them members, but they're members in name only. They're really just donors and supporters. They don't have any control over policy. They don't have any say over policy. They don't have any control over who your spokesmen are or who your leader is. All of that is problematic because if you are serious about changing society, you need buy-in from hundreds and hundreds of people to deal with the blob and all the other very serious problems that you want to be able to tackle. You will not do it unless you change your model and train people to know what to say and how to say it when the BBC microphone is put in front of them.
Well, it's a fair point. It's just one briefly for you.
Yeah, so I mean, I by the way, I completely agree with you. And I think that the Reform Party is going to have to reform its constitution. Because you can't be a political party controlled in a company structure. And it was one of the issues that I had in joining Reform. But you know, Richard and I are pretty ad idem on most things, and Anne and, you know, the rest of the Brexit Party lot. But you're right, you've got to have a mechanism by which the membership can exercise their view and that you make policy collectively and you elect your leader collectively. And that isn't the case with Reform. I think Richard accepts that. He understands that he needs to reform in that direction. The key, though, one of the key things people forget is that we're an insurgent. And we need to move at speed, and we need to be able to move, and I use the word in a positive sense, aggressively. And it's quite difficult to do that if you're held back by, you know, a kind of big party structure. One of the reasons the Brexit Party was so successful was because we could just move at speed, make decisions, move on. And in a sense, and I'm going to digress just very briefly, in a sense, it's a shame that we've got such large policy portfolios. In a sense, I wish this was a one policy election, like the Brexit election was in 2019. And I greatly regret, and that was a decision made by one or two people in the party, I greatly regret that terrific opportunity we had to genuinely change politics for good on a one issue that the entire nation could understand and get its head round, we stood down 317 candidates against the Tories. And that was, at the time I was very uneasy about it. I defended it because I was part of the party. And now with the benefit of hindsight, I think it was one of the greatest opportunities in political history given up, because we really could have made a massive impact. But you're absolutely right. We do need to do something about the structure of the party.
Final question. Oh, there was a man there put his hand straight away. The gentleman in the back with the red T-shirt. A question, please, sir. Keep it kind of brief if you can.
Okay, so a bit of audience participation with this. If you understand the concept, including you guys, put your hand up. Fractional reserve banking. Okay,
Oh, if you
that's good
understand
from
what it
you
is.
guys. That's good from you. Fiat currency. Anybody know what that is? Yep, that's good. The gold standard.
Yes.
Happy days. That's all I wanted to ask.
All right. Okay. Well,
Easily pleased.
can I just want to ask one question finally. You said you want the Tory party obliterated. We want. I gather that it was out of their sheer incompetence that you did, but isn't it the point as well that they just simply don't even pretend to be conservative anymore? I mean, you know, it seems to me that, well, for example, you can tell you just don't actually even hear them say the word conservative. When was the last time you heard them refer to themselves as the Conservative Party? And I think that's sort of very telling. I'm not making a semantical point, but if it were just about competence, then yes, you could say this is a bad administration or whatever. They just do not think in conservative ways anymore. That is a crucial thing.
It's true.
Isn't that the great opportunity that you've got, even though you're a left-wing party?
Well, it is, yeah. But I mean, we're getting philosophical now. I think our social conservatism actually requires some left-wing economics, things like housing. I think you just can't argue otherwise. Trade, I'd make the same point, unless you're in the pay of the Chinese Communist Party. which sometimes I think the Tories are, because of 5G, yeah, let's let them do that. Nuclear power, let's let them do that. Crazy, insane. Some of my best friends are Conservatives. My main argument is Peter Hitchen's argument. They're not a force for conservatism at all. They're just not. So, would it make any difference, really, if you had Rachel Reeves instead of Hunt? It wouldn't. It wouldn't make any difference. It's basically the same. So we're wasting time until we can build something better, and that's what we're trying to do.
Isn't this a great opportunity to replace the Conservative Party?
Absolutely right. And if Richard were here, he would say that they're the con-socialists. They're not actually the Conservative Party, and I completely agree with him. And, I'm a Conservative. I'm a traditional Conservative. Small state, low taxation, deregulated, put the power back to the people, allow people to make their own decisions, move forward, put British national interest first. All these things should be statements of the obvious that any government should wish to do. But they're challenged by it. And I think the real problem here is that the organism of government has become so big and so powerful and so desirous as an organism to promote its own interests that the interests of the private sector and the interests of the people are now subordinate. We're run by independent bodies. They can hijack democracy that way. They want to join the EU. That's another way to hijack democracy. Part of the UN, signing up to UN charters, signing up to WHO regulation, all of that pulls power away from the people. And ultimately, a Conservative wants to give power back to the people. And they're not doing it.
Well, look, William Clouston and Ben Habib, I think you've been very game coming along and talking about your parties actually today. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much indeed.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Good on there.
Cheers.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.